The snow came down like a curtain of white death, and Victoria Kendall knew she had perhaps an hour before her body would simply stop fighting the cold. She urged her horse forward through the blinding Colorado blizzard, her fingers so numb inside her gloves that she could barely feel the reins, her face burning with frost despite the scarf wrapped around it. The horse stumbled, and Victoria felt her heart lurch with terror. If the animal went down, they would both die out here in this frozen wilderness, miles from anywhere civilized. She had been foolish to leave Denver when the sky looked so threatening, but her aunt in Georgetown had sent word of illness, and Victoria had thought she could outrun the storm. She had been wrong. Through the swirling white chaos, Victoria thought she saw something dark against the endless snow. A structure. Her heart leaped with desperate hope. She guided her horse toward it, praying it was not just her frozen mind playing tricks. The shape solidified as she drew closer, a cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. Thank God! Thank God! She would have wept with relief if her face had not been so frozen. She half fell from her horse when she reached the small porch, her legs barely able to hold her weight. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely knock on the door, but she managed to pound against the wood with the side of her fist. The door opened, and warmth rushed out to meet her. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He took one look at her snow-covered, trembling form and immediately reached out to pull her inside. "Jesus," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Get in here before you freeze to death." Victoria stumbled into the cabin, and the man caught her elbow to steady her. "My horse," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Outside." "I will get him," the man said. "You get close to that fire." He pointed to the stone fireplace where flames crackled and danced. Then he grabbed a heavy coat from a hook by the door and went out into the storm. Victoria stumbled toward the fire, her entire body shaking with cold. She could barely feel her feet, and her fingers were white and waxy looking when she pulled off her gloves. She held her hands toward the flames, and as the warmth began to penetrate, the pain started. It felt like 1,000 needles stabbing into her skin, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Slowly, carefully, she unwound the scarf from her face and pulled off her heavy coat. Her dress beneath was damp with melted snow, and she knew she should change, but she had no other clothes with her. Everything she had packed was still in her saddlebags. The door opened again, bringing a blast of cold air and swirling snow. The man came in, dusted with white, and shut the door firmly behind him. "Your horse is in the lean-to with mine," he said. "I rubbed him down and gave him feed. He should be all right." "Thank you," Victoria said, and her voice broke slightly on the words. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You probably would have," the man said bluntly. He shrugged off his coat and hung it back on the hook. "This storm came up fast. You should not have been traveling in weather like this." "I know," Victoria said. She felt tears prick at her eyes, partly from relief and partly from the shame of her own foolishness. "I thought I could make it to Georgetown before it hit." The man looked at her more carefully now, taking in her quality dress, her fine leather boots, her carefully pinned hair that was now coming loose from its arrangement. "Georgetown is still a good 10 miles from here," he said. "You would not have made it." He moved to the fire and picked up a kettle that was sitting at the edge of the hearth. "You need something hot to drink. Coffee or tea? Either. Both. Anything warm," Victoria said gratefully. She watched as he poured steaming coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and she felt the warmth of his skin against hers. He had strong hands, calloused and scarred from hard work. Ranch work, she guessed. "I am Wade Sutton," he said, stepping back and leaning against the rough wooden table that stood in the center of the small cabin. "I run a cattle operation about 5 miles south of here. This is my line shack." "Victoria Kendall," she replied, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. "From Denver. I was traveling to Georgetown to see my aunt. She is ill." Wade nodded slowly. "Well, Miss Kendall, you are not going anywhere for a while. This storm is going to last at least another day, maybe 2. You are stuck here." Victoria felt her stomach drop. Stuck in a small cabin with a strange man with no chaperone for days. Her reputation would be ruined if anyone found out. But what choice did she have? It was this or death in the snow. "I understand," she said quietly. "I am grateful for the shelter." Wade must have seen something in her face because his expression softened slightly. "I will sleep on the floor," he said. "You can have the bed, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be safe here." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. He had a strong face, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. His jaw was square and determined, his mouth firm but not cruel. He looked like a man who kept his word. "Thank you," she said. "I believe you." Something flickered in Wade's gray eyes, something that might have been respect. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said. "I have some spare shirts and trousers that will be too big for you, but they are better than catching pneumonia." He went to a wooden chest in the corner and pulled out a worn flannel shirt and a pair of brown trousers. "There is a blanket you can hold up in the corner there for privacy." Victoria took the clothes with another murmured thanks. Her cheeks burned as she moved to the corner of the cabin, and Wade held up the blanket, turning his back to give her privacy. She quickly stripped out of her damp dress and undergarments, shivering in the cold air, and pulled on the dry clothes. The shirt hung to her knees and the trousers had to be rolled up several times, but they were warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. She emerged from behind the blanket, and Wade lowered it, carefully not looking at her until she cleared her throat. When he did look, his lips quirked slightly. "You look like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes," he said, but there was no mockery in his voice, only a gentle amusement that made Victoria smile despite herself. "I must look ridiculous," she admitted, "but I feel much warmer." "That is what matters," Wade said. He draped her wet clothes over a chair near the fire to dry. "Are you hungry? I have salt pork and beans, some bread and dried apples." Victoria realized she was famished. She had eaten nothing since breakfast, and that had been many hours ago. "Yes, please." "I would be grateful for anything." Wade set about preparing a simple meal, moving with the easy competence of a man who was used to taking care of himself. Victoria watched him, fascinated despite herself. Men of her acquaintance in Denver were not like this. They were bankers and merchants and lawyers, men who wore suits and worked indoors. Wade Sutton was something entirely different. He was a man of the wilderness, strong and capable and utterly self-sufficient. There was something compelling about that. They ate together at the small table, sitting on rough wooden benches. The food was simple but good, and Victoria ate more than she would have thought possible. Wade was not much of a conversationalist, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin it was warm and safe. Victoria found herself relaxing, the tension draining out of her shoulders. "How long have you been ranching?" she asked, breaking the silence. Wade looked up from his plate. "All my life," he said. "My father had a small spread in Texas. When he died, I sold it and came north. That was 5 years ago. I have been building my herd ever since." "Is it hard work?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. "The hardest," Wade said. "But it is honest work and it is mine. I answer to no one but myself." There was a fierce independence in his words that Victoria envied. She had always answered to someone, first her parents, then her uncle who was her guardian after they died. She had no real freedom, no real choices. Her life had been mapped out for her since birth, a comfortable but constrained existence of social obligations and expectations. "That must be wonderful," she said softly. Wade studied her face. "You do not have that kind of freedom." "No," Victoria admitted. "I am expected to marry well and manage a household and raise children. That is the extent of my options." "And is there someone you are expected to marry?" Wade asked, his voice carefully neutral. Victoria thought of Charles Hartman, the banker's son who had been courting her with her uncle's enthusiastic approval. Charles was handsome and wealthy and utterly boring. "There is someone my uncle favors," she said, "but I have not agreed to anything yet." Wade nodded slowly. "A woman should have a say in who she marries," he said. "That is a decision that affects her whole life." "I agree," Victoria said, "but not everyone sees it that way." They finished their meal in silence, and Wade cleared the dishes. Night was falling outside, the darkness made even deeper by the storm. Wade lit a lantern and hung it from a hook in the ceiling. The small flame cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Victoria felt exhaustion creeping over her, the combination of the warmth, the food, and the ordeal she had been through. She tried to stifle a yawn and failed. "You should sleep," Wade said, noticing. "You have had a hard day." Victoria wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She moved to the narrow bed in the corner, and Wade handed her a thick quilt. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. You saved my life today." Wade shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Not everyone would have." "You are a good man, Wade Sutton." Something flickered across Wade's face, too quick for Victoria to identify. "Sleep well, Miss Kendall," he said, and turned away to bank the fire. Victoria lay down on the bed, pulling the quilt over her. Despite the strangeness of the situation, she felt safe. She watched Wade move around the cabin, preparing his own makeshift bed on the floor near the fire. He moved with a quiet grace, and Victoria found herself watching the play of muscles under his shirt. She felt her cheeks heat and quickly closed her eyes. She should not be thinking such things about a man she had just met. But as she drifted off to sleep, listening to the storm rage outside and the crackling of the fire inside, Victoria could not help but think that fate had brought her to this place for a reason. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, Victoria was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory flooded back, the storm, the desperate ride, the cabin. Wade. She sat up, pushing her hair back from her face, and saw Wade standing at the small stove, cooking breakfast. Morning light filtered through the single window, but it was dim and gray. The storm was still raging. "Good morning," Wade said without turning around. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Victoria admitted. She stood up, feeling self-conscious in the oversized clothes. "How is the storm?" "Still bad," Wade said. "We are not going anywhere today." He turned and handed her a plate with bacon, eggs, and more of the bread from last night. "Eat. You need your strength." They ate together again, and this time Victoria felt less shy about asking questions. She learned that Wade was 28 years old, that he had no family left except a sister in Texas, who was married with children of her own. He had built his ranch from nothing, working harder than Victoria could even imagine to carve out a life for himself in this harsh land. He spoke simply and without boasting, but Victoria could hear the pride in his voice when he talked about his cattle, his land, his future plans. In turn, she told him about her own life in Denver, about her parents who had died when she was 16, a cholera outbreak that had swept through the city, about her uncle who had taken her in, who was kind but distant, more concerned with business than family. About the suffocating social expectations that governed every moment of her existence. Wade listened without judgment, and Victoria found herself telling him things she had never told anyone else. "It sounds like a prison," Wade said when she finished. "A pretty prison, but a prison all the same." "Sometimes it feels that way," Victoria admitted, "but I should be grateful. I have everything I need: food, shelter, security." "But not freedom," Wade said. "Not choice." "No," Victoria agreed softly. "Not those." The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of abating, and they were trapped in the small cabin together. But Victoria found she did not mind as much as she should have. Wade was easy company, quiet but not sullen, willing to talk but not demanding conversation. They played cards with a worn deck Wade had in his supplies. They read from the only 2 books in the cabin, a battered copy of the Bible and a collection of Robert Burns' poetry that surprised Victoria. "My mother loved poetry," Wade explained when he saw her surprise. "She made sure I learned to read properly. She said a man without education was only half a man." "She sounds like a wise woman," Victoria said. "She was," Wade agreed. "I miss her every day." As evening fell again, they prepared another simple meal together. Victoria found herself standing close to Wade at the small stove, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. He smelled of wood smoke and leather, and something else, something masculine and appealing that made her pulse quicken. She glanced up and found him looking at her with an intensity that took her breath away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Wade stepped back, putting distance between them. "Supper is ready," he said, his voice rough. They ate in a silence that was charged with something new, something electric. Victoria was acutely aware of every movement Wade made, every time their eyes met across the small table. She knew she should be alarmed by what she was feeling, this pull toward a man she barely knew. But she was not alarmed. She was exhilarated. After supper, they sat by the fire. Wade whittled a piece of wood with a pocket knife, his hands moving with practiced skill. Victoria watched the firelight play across his features, highlighting the strong lines of his face. "What are you making?" she asked. Wade held up the wood. It was beginning to take the shape of a horse, small and delicate despite the roughness of the tools. "Just something to pass the time," he said. "I used to make these for my sister's children." "It is beautiful," Victoria said. She held out her hand. "May I?" Wade placed the carving in her palm and their fingers touched. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. Victoria looked up and found Wade watching her with those storm-gray eyes, and she felt something shift inside her chest. "Wade," she said softly, not even sure what she wanted to say. "Victoria," he replied, and hearing her name in his low voice made her shiver. "I should not be feeling what I am feeling," he said bluntly. "You are a lady from Denver. I am a rancher who lives in a line shack half the year. We are from different worlds." "I do not care," Victoria said, and realized with a start that it was true. She did not care about the differences between them, about what society would say about any of it. "I have never felt this way before." "Neither have I," Wade admitted. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. "But you will leave when the storm ends. You will go to Georgetown and then back to Denver, and this will just be a strange memory." "Will it?" Victoria asked. She leaned into his touch, feeling bold and reckless and more alive than she had felt in years. "What if I do not want it to be just a memory?" Wade's breath caught. "Victoria, you do not know what you are saying. You have a life in Denver, expectations, obligations." "I have a cage in Denver," Victoria corrected. "But here with you, I feel free." Wade groaned softly. "You are making this very difficult," he said. but he did not pull his hand away. Instead, he cupped her face with both hands and looked into her eyes. "If we do this, if we take this step, there is no going back. Do you understand that?" "Yes," Victoria whispered. "I understand." Wade leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Victoria did not pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was like fire spreading through her veins. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, exploring. Then it deepened, and Victoria felt Wade's arms come around her, pulling her close. She pressed against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with all the passion she had kept locked away for so long. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Lord help me," he said. "I am falling in love with you, Victoria Kendall." "Good," Victoria said, smiling through tears she had not realized were falling, "because I am falling in love with you too." They sat together by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked until the early hours of the morning. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other, exploring this new connection between them. Wade told her about his dreams for his ranch, how he wanted to build a real house, raise fine cattle, make something lasting. Victoria told him about her dreams too, dreams she had barely admitted to herself. She wanted to be more than an ornament in someone's parlor. She wanted to do things, make things matter. "You could do that here," Wade said carefully. "With me, if you wanted." Victoria pulled back to look at him. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I am asking you to think about it," Wade said. "I know it is crazy. We have known each other for 2 days, but Victoria, I have never felt anything like this. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and when I think about you leaving, it feels like someone is tearing my heart out." "I feel the same way," Victoria admitted. "But Wade, I do not know anything about ranching. I would be useless to you." "You would learn," Wade said. "And you would not be useless. You could keep the books, manage the household, help me plan for the future. Victoria, I am not asking you to be a rancher. I am asking you to be my partner, my wife." Victoria's heart stopped. "Your wife, if you will have me," Wade said. "I know I do not have much to offer. The ranch is still small, and the house I want to build is still just a dream, but I would work every day for the rest of my life to make you happy. I would give you freedom and choice and a say in everything. It would be hard work and lonely sometimes, but it would be yours. Ours." Victoria looked at this man who had appeared in her life like a miracle in the storm. She thought about her life in Denver, the suffocating expectations, the loveless marriage that awaited her. And she thought about this, a life of freedom and purpose and love. Real love, the kind that made her heart race and her breath catch, the kind she had always dreamed of but never thought she would find. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Wade's face split into a grin so wide and genuine that Victoria's heart melted all over again. He kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. "You will not regret this," he said against her lips. "I swear to you, Victoria, I will spend every day making sure you never regret this." "I already know I will not," Victoria said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They spent that night holding each other, talking and planning and dreaming together. Victoria felt as if she had been sleepwalking through her entire life and had finally woken up. Everything was sharper, brighter, more real. She had come to this cabin desperate for shelter, running from a storm, but she had found something far more valuable than protection from the cold. She had found love. She had found her future. The storm finally broke on the 3rd day. Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through the window and silence outside. She sat up and saw Wade already awake, standing at the window and looking out at the transformed landscape. Everything was white, pristine and beautiful in the morning light. "It is over," Wade said, turning to look at her. "The storm is over." Victoria climbed out of bed and went to stand beside him. The world outside looked like a painting, all soft white curves and blue shadows. It was beautiful, but Victoria felt a pang of sadness. The storm ending meant returning to the real world, dealing with the consequences of their decisions. "I need to send word to my uncle," she said. "He will be worried about me, and I need to go to Georgetown to check on my aunt." "I will take you," Wade said. "But Victoria, are you sure about this?" "About us. Because once we tell people, once we make this public, there is no taking it back." Victoria turned to face him fully. In the morning light, with his hair rumpled and his jaw shadowed with stubble, he looked more handsome than ever. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," she said firmly. "Have you changed your mind?" "Never," Wade said. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I just needed to be sure you had not changed yours." They prepared to leave the cabin, and Victoria felt a strange reluctance to go. This small, simple space had become sacred to her, the place where her new life had begun. But she knew they could not stay here forever. They had to face the world and make their stand. The ride to Georgetown was long and cold, but the day was clear and beautiful. Wade kept his horse close to Victoria's, and every time their eyes met, Victoria felt her heart swell with love. They talked about practical things now, about how to break the news to her uncle, about where they would marry, about what would happen next. "Your uncle may not approve," Wade warned. "I am not the kind of man he probably wants for you." "My uncle wants me to marry money and social standing," Victoria said. "But it is not his life. It is mine, and I choose you." Georgetown appeared before them in the early afternoon, a bustling mining town nestled in the mountains. The streets were packed with snow, but they were already being cleared by teams of workers. Wade led them to the small hotel in the center of town. "We should get you a room," he said. "You can clean up and rest, and then we will go see your aunt. Will you stay?" Victoria asked, suddenly anxious at the thought of being separated from him. "I will get my own room," Wade said gently. "I do not want to damage your reputation any more than necessary. But I am not going anywhere, Victoria. I will be right here." Victoria nodded, knowing he was right but hating the practicality of it. They went into the hotel together, and Wade paid for 2 rooms. The clerk gave them a curious look, but said nothing. In a mining town like Georgetown, people learned to mind their own business. Victoria's room was small but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin. She cleaned up as best she could, braiding her hair and brushing the dust from her dress, which had finally dried. When she looked in the small mirror, she saw a different woman than the one who had left Denver days ago. This woman had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. This woman looked alive. Wade knocked on her door, and they went together to find her aunt's house. It was a modest cottage on the edge of town, and Victoria felt her stomach knot with worry as they approached. She had received word of her aunt's illness, but she did not know how serious it was. Her aunt's neighbor answered the door, a plump woman with kind eyes. "Oh, Miss Kendall," she said. "We have been so worried about you. Your aunt said you were coming, but then the storm hit, and we thought perhaps you had taken shelter somewhere." "I did," Victoria said. "Is my aunt all right?" "She is much better," the neighbor said, relief evident in her voice. "The fever broke 2 days ago. She has been fretting about you something terrible, though." Victoria felt tears of relief prick her eyes. "Can I see her?" "Of course, dear. Come in, come in." The woman ushered them inside, glancing curiously at Wade. Victoria's Aunt Margaret was sitting up in bed, looking pale but definitely on the mend. When she saw Victoria, she burst into tears. "Victoria! Oh, my dear girl, I was so worried. Where have you been?" Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and took her aunt's hands. "I got caught in the storm," she said. "I would have died if not for this man." She gestured to Wade, who was standing respectfully near the door. "Aunt Margaret, this is Wade Sutton. He gave me shelter and saved my life." Margaret looked at Wade with new eyes, assessing him carefully. "Then I owe you a great debt, Mr. Sutton," she said. "Thank you for taking care of my niece." "It was my honor, madam," Wade said simply. Margaret looked between them, and Victoria saw the exact moment when her aunt realized there was more to the story. Her eyes widened slightly. "Victoria," she said carefully, "perhaps we should talk privately." Wade took the hint. "I will wait outside," he said, and left the room, closing the door behind him. Margaret fixed Victoria with a stern look. "Tell me everything," she said, "and do not leave anything out." Victoria took a deep breath and told her aunt the truth, all of it. About the storm, the cabin, the 3 days alone with Wade, about falling in love, about Wade's proposal, about her decision to marry him. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing more and more concerned. When Victoria finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed deeply. "Your uncle is going to have an apoplexy," she said. "I know," Victoria admitted. "But Aunt Margaret, I love him, and he loves me. I know it seems sudden, but it is real. More real than anything I have ever felt." Margaret reached out and cupped Victoria's cheek. "I can see that," she said softly. "Your face lights up when you talk about him. But Victoria, do you understand what you are giving up? The comfort, the security, the social position." "I understand," Victoria said. "But none of that matters without love. And I would rather have a hard life with Wade than an easy life with someone I do not love." Margaret smiled sadly. "You sound just like your mother," she said. "She was headstrong too. It used to drive your grandfather mad." She paused. "Is he a good man, this Wade Sutton, the best?" Victoria said without hesitation. "He is honest and hardworking and kind. He treats me like an equal, not a possession. He wants me to be happy, not just obedient." "Those are rare qualities," Margaret admitted. She looked toward the door where Wade had exited. "Very well. If you are certain this is what you want, then I will support you, but you need to write to your uncle immediately. He deserves to know before he hears it as gossip." "I will," Victoria promised. She hugged her aunt carefully, mindful of her recent illness. "Thank you for understanding." "I am not sure I do understand," Margaret said wryly, "but I know the look of a woman in love, and I know better than to stand in the way of it." Victoria found Wade outside, leaning against the porch railing and looking out at the snowy street. He straightened when he saw her. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Victoria said. "She is surprised, but she will support us." She took his hand, not caring who might see. "I need to write to my uncle, and we need to talk to the preacher." Wade's face split into that wonderful grin again. "So we are really doing this. We are really doing this," Victoria confirmed, and felt a rush of joy so intense it almost took her breath away. They spent the next few days in Georgetown, making their preparations. Victoria wrote a long letter to her uncle, trying to explain her decision in a way he might understand. She was not sure she succeeded, but she tried. Wade made arrangements with the local preacher for a small wedding ceremony. They bought a simple gold ring from the general store, and Victoria found a pretty blue dress that would serve as a wedding gown. The news spread quickly through the small town. A lady from Denver marrying a rancher she had just met. It was the kind of story people loved to gossip about. But Wade and Victoria did not care. They were too happy, too caught up in each other and their plans for the future. On a bright, cold morning a week after the storm, Victoria Kendall became Victoria Sutton. The ceremony was small and simple, held in the little church with only Aunt Margaret, a few of Wade's rancher friends, and some curious townspeople in attendance. Victoria wore her blue dress and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers that Margaret had saved from the summer. Wade wore a new shirt and looked so handsome that Victoria felt her heart might burst. When the preacher asked if she would take this man to be her husband, Victoria said, "I will," in a voice that rang clear and true through the church. And when Wade slipped the gold ring onto her finger and kissed her, sealing their vows, Victoria felt as if she had finally come home. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Georgetown, and it was everything Victoria had dreamed of and more. Wade was gentle and patient, and the love they made was tender and passionate and perfect. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Are you crying?" Wade asked, concerned. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Victoria said, laughing through her tears. "I am just so happy. I did not know it was possible to be this happy." Wade kissed her forehead. "Get used to it," he said, "because I plan to make you this happy every single day for the rest of our lives." The next morning, they began the journey to Wade's ranch. It was a full day's ride, and Victoria was nervous. She had committed to this life, but she still had no idea what it would really be like. What if she was terrible at it? What if she could not adapt to the hard work and isolation? But when they crested a rise and Wade pointed down into the valley below, saying, "There it is, our home," Victoria felt her worries fade. The ranch was beautiful in its simplicity. There was a small wooden house, a barn, corrals, and open rangeland stretching as far as the eye could see. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the blue sky. It was wild and untamed and absolutely perfect. "It is not much yet," Wade said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it will be. I promise you, Victoria, I will build you a proper house, with real glass windows and a stone fireplace and everything you could want." "It is already perfect," Victoria said honestly. "It is ours." They rode down into the valley together, and Victoria began her new life as a rancher's wife. It was hard work, just as Wade had warned. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to churn butter, to tend the chickens Wade kept for eggs. She learned to help with the cattle when Wade needed an extra pair of hands, to sit a horse for hours at a time, to read the weather and the land. Her hands, once soft and white, became calloused and strong. Her face, once carefully protected from the sun, became tanned and freckled, but she had never been happier. Every morning she woke up next to the man she loved. Every night they sat together and talked about their day, making plans for the future. Wade treated her as his true partner, asking her opinion on every decision, valuing her thoughts and ideas. He taught her everything he knew about ranching, and she proved to be a quick learner. Spring came, and with it new calves and hard work. Victoria helped Wade with the branding, her nose wrinkling at the smell of burnt hair but her hands steady as she held the rope. They worked from dawn until dusk, exhausted but satisfied. Summer followed, hot and dry, and Victoria learned to love the cool evenings when she and Wade would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. A letter came from Victoria's uncle in Denver. It was stiff and formal, making it clear that he was deeply disappointed in her choices, but that he wished her well regardless. He had enclosed a bank draft, a wedding gift that was more than generous. Victoria knew it was his way of saying goodbye, of cutting ties with a niece who had refused to do her duty. She felt a pang of sadness, but it was brief. She had made her choice, and she did not regret it. Autumn brought the first signs of snow, and Wade began making preparations for winter. They stocked the house with provisions, brought the cattle down from the high pastures, and cut wood for the fires they would need. Victoria thought about the storm that had brought her here, how desperate she had been, how afraid. And she thought about how that desperation had led her to the greatest gift of her life. On the anniversary of that storm, Wade surprised her. He led her out to the spot where the lined shack stood, the place where they had met. He had cleaned it out and fixed it up, replacing the broken window and adding a small porch. "I thought we could keep it," he said. As a reminder of where we started, Victoria threw her arms around him, overwhelmed with emotion. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much, Wade Sutton." "I love you too," Wade said, "and I have something else for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving. It was the horse he had been whittling that night by the fire, now finished and polished smooth. "I kept working on it," he said. "I wanted to finish it for you." Victoria took the carving with trembling hands. It was beautiful, every detail perfect. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will treasure it always." That winter was long and cold, but Victoria and Wade spent it warm and safe in their little house. They read together by the fire, played cards, made love, and dreamed about the future. And when spring came again, Victoria had news that made Wade shout with joy and swing her around until she was dizzy and laughing. She was pregnant. The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Wade hovered over her like a worried mother hen, making her rest, bringing her whatever she could stomach. But as the months passed, Victoria grew stronger. Her belly swelled with their child, and Wade would place his hands on it at night, feeling the baby move, his face filled with wonder. "Boy or girl?" he would ask. "What do you think?" "I do not care," Victoria would say honestly, "as long as the baby is healthy." But secretly, Victoria hoped for a boy. A son who would have Wade's gray eyes and strong hands, who would grow up to be good and kind and honorable like his father. The baby came in early autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to turn. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Victoria was afraid, when she thought she might not survive. But Wade was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her she was strong and brave and that she could do this. And finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Victoria heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," the midwife said, placing the tiny, squirming bundle in Victoria's arms. "You have a son." Victoria looked down at the red, wrinkled face of her child and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. The baby had dark hair, and when he finally opened his eyes, they were gray like his father's. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Wade was crying unashamedly, tears running down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Victoria, he is absolutely perfect." They named him William after Wade's father. Little William Sutton was the joy of their lives. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he grew quickly. Wade was a devoted father, always making time to hold his son, to talk to him, to marvel at every tiny sound and movement. Victoria had never seen anything more attractive than Wade cradling their baby in his strong arms, singing off-key lullabies. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch grew and prospered. Wade's cattle herd doubled, then tripled. He was able to hire 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in a bunkhouse Wade built near the barn. And true to his word, Wade built Victoria the house he had promised. It was bigger than the first one, with real glass windows and a stone fireplace and a proper kitchen. Victoria furnished it lovingly, making it a real home. William grew from a baby to a toddler to a rambunctious little boy with his father's stubbornness and his mother's quick mind. He followed Wade everywhere, wanting to help with everything, and Wade patiently taught him about the ranch, about the land, about what it meant to be a man of honor. When William was 3, Victoria found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and when the baby came, it was a girl. They named her Margaret after Victoria's aunt, and she had her mother's dark hair and delicate features. Wade doted on his daughter shamelessly, saying she had him wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Victoria sometimes thought about her old life in Denver, about the path she had almost taken. She had received word that Charles Hartman, the man her uncle had wanted her to marry, had indeed married someone else. According to the letter from a former friend, he was a cold and distant husband, more interested in his business than his wife. Victoria felt a rush of gratitude that she had escaped that fate. More years passed. William grew into a lanky, serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Margaret was a sweet, gentle child who loved flowers and animals and could charm anyone with her smile. Wade and Victoria added to their family again, another boy they named Robert, who came into the world with a lusty cry and never seemed to stop moving. The ranch continued to prosper. Wade's reputation grew as a fair and honest rancher who treated his workers well and his cattle better. Neighboring ranchers came to him for advice, and the Sutton brand became known throughout the territory as a mark of quality. Victoria managed the household and the books, and her sharp mind for figures helped them avoid more than one financial pitfall. They were partners in every sense of the word, and their love only deepened with time. On the 10th anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, Wade took Victoria back to the line shack. The children stayed with one of the ranch hands and his wife, who lived on the property now. It was just the two of them, like it had been in the beginning. "You remember?" Wade asked, looking at the small cabin that still stood, preserved as a reminder of their past. "Every moment," Victoria said. "I was so cold and so scared, and then you opened that door and my whole life changed." "Mine too," Wade said. He took her hand and led her inside. The cabin was clean and tidy, kept up over the years. They had spent several anniversaries here, revisiting the place where their love story had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Wade asked. "Giving up your old life for this one?" Victoria turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, with you, with our children, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I dreamed possible. The blizzard made me desperate for shelter, but love made me stay, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Wade kissed her, and it was like coming home. After 10 years of marriage, 3 children, countless challenges and triumphs, their love was stronger than ever. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Sutton," he said against her lips. "And you are mine," Victoria replied. They stayed at the cabin that night, lying together on the narrow bed just as they had 10 years ago. They made love with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of new discovery. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about their future, about watching their children grow, about growing old together on the land they had built with their own hands. The years continued to unfold like the pages of a book. William turned 18 and took on more responsibility at the ranch, his father's right hand in every way. He was courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sensible young woman with a good head on her shoulders, and Wade and Victoria approved wholeheartedly. Margaret, at 15, was turning into a beauty, though she seemed oblivious to the attention she drew. She wanted to be a teacher, and Victoria encouraged her, helping her study and prepare. Robert, at 12, was still wild and reckless, always getting into trouble but with a good heart underneath his mischief. Victoria looked at her family gathered around the dinner table one evening and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was what she had been meant for, not the suffocating life of Denver society, but this loud, chaotic, beautiful existence. She caught Wade's eye across the table, and he winked at her, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest that had never gone away. As the children grew and left, starting lives of their own, Wade and Victoria found themselves alone again. William married his sweetheart and built a house on the far side of the ranch property, starting his own family. Margaret indeed became a teacher, running the small school in Georgetown and making her parents proud. Robert, after several false starts, found his calling as a horse breeder, developing a reputation for training the finest horses in Colorado. Wade and Victoria grew old together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing. But their love never diminished. They still held hands on the porch in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They had survived droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and financial worries, all the challenges that life on a ranch could throw at them. And they had survived together, stronger for every trial. When they were in their 60s, Wade took Victoria on a journey. They traveled back to Denver, staying in a fine hotel that Victoria remembered from her youth. The city had changed, grown larger and more modern. They walked the streets together, and Victoria pointed out places from her old life. The house where she had lived with her uncle was still there, though strangers lived in it now. "You miss it at all?" Wade asked, standing on the street corner where Victoria had once walked as a girl. Victoria looked around at the bustling city, the fine ladies in their fashionable dresses, the gentlemen in their suits. She thought about what her life might have been if she had never left, if she had married Charles Hartman or someone like him. A life of comfort and constraint, of empty social obligations and hollow respectability. "No," she said, taking Wade's arm, "this was never really my home. Home is with you on our ranch with our family. That is where I belong." Wade smiled and kissed her temple. "Then let us go home," he said. They returned to the ranch, to the house Wade had built for her all those years ago. Their children and grandchildren came to visit regularly, filling the house with noise and laughter. Victoria would sit in her rocking chair on the porch, holding a grandchild on her lap, and watch Wade teach the older children about the cattle, just as he had taught their own children. And she would think about the young woman she had been, desperate and afraid in a blizzard, stumbling onto a cabin that held her destiny. Love had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean years, moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, Wade had been her rock, her partner, her best friend, and she had been his. They had built a life together from nothing but determination and love, and it was a life worth living. As Victoria grew older, her health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for many decades. Wade was always there, caring for her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. When her hands were too stiff with arthritis to hold a cup steady, he held it for her. When she was too tired to walk to the porch, he carried her. And when she was having a good day, he would take her out to see the cattle, to ride slowly through the land they loved. One evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the mountains, Victoria took Wade's hand. "I have had a good life," she said softly, "the best life." "Do not talk like that," Wade said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are not going anywhere." "Not yet," Victoria agreed, "but someday. And when that day comes, I want you to know that I have never regretted a single moment. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made." Wade raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me everything," he said. "A family, a home, a purpose. You made me a better man than I ever would have been without you." "We made each other better," Victoria corrected. "That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors paint the sky. Victoria thought about the storm that had driven her to Wade's door, about the fear and desperation that had brought her to the moment that changed everything. She had been looking for shelter, but she had found so much more. She had found love, real and true and lasting. She had found freedom and purpose and joy. She had found home. Many more years passed before Victoria's time finally came. She was 82 years old, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Wade held her hand as she slipped away peacefully in the bed they had shared for more than 60 years. Her last words were, "I love you," and Wade whispered them back. Tears streaming down his weathered face, Wade lived for 3 more years after Victoria died. He spent them surrounded by family, telling stories about his beloved wife, making sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew about the extraordinary woman who had built this legacy with him. He kept the line shack maintained, though he could no longer make the journey there himself. It was a shrine to their love, a reminder of where it all began. When Wade's time came, he went peacefully in his sleep, his hand clutching the small wooden horse he had carved for Victoria so many years ago. The family found it in his grip and knew that wherever he was going to be with her again. They buried Wade next to Victoria on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Colorado sky they both had loved. And the land they had built together continued on, passed down through generations of Suttons who knew the story of how it all began. The story of a blizzard and a desperate woman, and a cowboy who opened his door and his heart. The story of how sometimes the worst storms of our lives lead us exactly where we are meant to be. The ranch still stands today, a testament to the love of Wade and Victoria Sutton. The original line shack is preserved, marked with a plaque telling the story of the couple who met there during the Great Blizzard. Descendants still work the land, still raise cattle under the Colorado sun, still tell the story of their remarkable ancestors. And on winter nights, when the snow falls and the wind howls, the family gathers around the fireplace in the house Wade built, and they remember. They remember a woman who rode through a blizzard and found her destiny. They remember a man who took her in and gave her his heart. They remember that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes being lost is the only way to find where you truly belong. The story of Wade and Victoria became legend in Georgetown and throughout the territory. Young couples would visit the line shack, hoping that some of the magic that had brought the Suttons together would bless their own relationships. The ranch became known not just for its fine cattle, but for the love story that had founded it. In the end, Victoria had been right all those years ago when she told Wade that the blizzard had made her desperate for shelter, but love had made her stay. She had come to that cabin seeking survival, but she had found life, real and full and beautiful. She had found a partner who valued her mind as much as her beauty, who challenged her to grow, who stood beside her through every trial. She had found children and grandchildren who carried forward the legacy of courage and love. She had found a home, not just in a place but in a person. And Wade had found the same. He had been a solitary man, building his dream alone, never expecting to find someone who would share not just his work but his soul. Victoria had come into his life like a miracle, and she had transformed everything. She had made his house a home, his work a shared purpose, his life complete. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had begun with one. It was a love story of daily choices, of waking up each morning and choosing each other again. It was a love story of partnership and respect, of laughter and tears, of building something together that was greater than either of them could have built alone. It was a love story that endured through decades, through challenges that would have broken a weaker bond. It was, in short, a love story for the ages. And it all began with a blizzard, a desperate ride through the snow, and a door opening to reveal not just shelter from the storm but a future beyond anything Victoria had ever imagined. She had been looking for a place to hide from the cold, and instead she had found the warmth that would sustain her for the rest of her life. She had been running from death, and instead she had found the greatest life she could have lived. The blizzard had been fierce and terrible and nearly fatal, but it had also been the greatest gift Victoria Kendall ever received, because it had led her to Wade Sutton. And in finding him, she had found herself, the woman she was meant to be, strong and capable and loved beyond measure. She had found freedom in a life that looked like constraint to others, had found joy in work that would have seemed like drudgery to her former society friends. She had found that happiness was not about comfort or security or social position. It was about love, pure and simple. Love that challenged you, supported you, transformed you. Love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And so the Sutton Ranch continued, generation after generation, built on the foundation of that love. The children taught their children about Wade and Victoria, about the blizzard and the cabin and the choice that changed everything. They taught them that love was not something that just happened, but something you built, day by day, choice by choice. They taught them that the greatest adventures sometimes begin with the greatest disasters, and that being lost can be the first step to being found. The legacy of Wade and Victoria Sutton was not just land and cattle and a successful ranch. It was a love story that inspired everyone who heard it. It was proof that true love exists, that it can blossom in the most unlikely circumstances, that it can endure through any trial. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we are most vulnerable, most desperate, most willing to take a chance on something unknown. Victoria had taken shelter from a blizzard and found love that lasted a lifetime. She had run from a storm and found her true home. She had been desperate and afraid, and she had found courage and joy. The blizzard had made her desperate for shelter, but love, true and deep and lasting love, had made her stay long beyond the storm. And in staying, in choosing love over comfort, adventure over security, she had found everything she had ever wanted and so much more than she had ever dreamed possible. That was the story. That was the legacy. That was the truth that the Sutton family carried forward through the generations. A truth written in the land they worked, in the love they shared, in the memory of two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together. The storm had passed long ago, but the love it had sheltered into being never ended. It lived on in every Sutton who walked the land, in every couple who visited the line shack, in every person who heard the story, and believed that true love was possible. Wade and Victoria Sutton had lived and loved and built a legacy that would never be forgotten. And it had all started with a blizzard, a cabin, and a door opening to reveal not just a man but a future, not just shelter but a home, not just survival but a life worth living. The storm had been fierce, but the love had been fiercer. And in the end, love had won, as it always does when it is real and true and brave enough to weather any storm.